overview of progress on the Church of England's environment programme. We're developing a 10-year plan because, of course, having set a target to put net zero by 2030, that's put us under quite a lot of pressure. But this isn't new. We've been working on environmental issues as a church since the 1990s, 1980s. There were things going on in General Synod and the Anglican Communion. And of course, really, this is as old as the Christian gospel itself. That sense of the care of God's creation being part of good stewardship, good discipleship from the very beginning. And I think increasingly I see this as part of the working out of the commandments to love God and love our neighbours as ourselves, and don't forget to care for the whole of creation. So the environment programme's right at the heart of what we're about. If we move on. Well, the staff are really important. I just wanted to pick up Joe Chamberlain and Catherine Ross's key staff, because, of course, one of the things that's happening to us at the moment is the Church of England's under a good deal of financial pressure. And I'm really resistant to this environmental work being one of the things that takes a hit. I think it'd be difficult to grow. But, you know, we're really grateful for the way in which this is worked out locally. The way in which those of you working in dioceses locally are doing this, many voluntarily, relatively few paid officers, but really grateful to Joe and Catherine for pulling this together. It's made a very big difference to the quality of our work. I thought Chris Stark was brilliant. Chris Stark is brilliant. I thought he gave a very good overview. But what we're all experiencing is extreme weather events, significant change. He talked about the ways in which we know this implicitly, but actually we've built up a great deal of evidence, and he was able to provide some of it as to what's going on in the world. It's interesting having the conversation at the same time as COVID, but that sense in which what for a long time has not been visible actually is in climate change pretty visible, and we really need to pay attention to it. That's part of the spirituality, I think, of being awake, alert, attentive to what's going on in our world and trying to hear the signs of the time and what's God saying to us in this. Back in the 1980s, the Anglican Communion worked out what started as 4 marks of mission, and then a few years later they added a 5th mark to proclaim the good news of the kingdom. A 5th mark to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. Now, it was an add-on, it really was an add-on, but it's not an add-on in the way we use them, because the reason it's there is because the other 4 did not make sense without it. It's absolutely integral to Christian life, to Christian discipleship, to the marks of mission, to what it is to be a Christian today. Well, they're the sorts of things we've been working on in the Church of England Environment Programme to support, encourage and enable the whole church to pray, speak and act prophetically on environmental issues which threaten to flourish the whole of creation. Of course, it's not just about climate change. There's got to be a wider programme, and this is about an environmental programme and not just a climate change programme. So if we look back on the progress since the last conference, I think we were feeling pretty confident about at that stage at what 2020 was going to bring. There was a clear programme which I was very excited about. I think that the ingredients just were fantastic. Starting with the Transitions Pathway Initiative and the, I think, tremendous work that the Church Commissioners, Pensions Board, National Church Institutions have been doing on an investment programme that actually matches our ambition in relation to the climate. It's world class, it's world leading. And Christiana Figueres, who chaired the Paris Climate Change Talk, said in a conference that I was at that she thought that the Church of England was leading on this and offering really considerable leadership. Ruth Valerio's Lent book oh, is that the carbon footprint tool, the energy tool that was at Synod? That's gone through. Really effective, terribly important. If you can't measure it, how do we know that we're reducing the carbon footprint? That's been a huge improvement, a great success. And many people have been using it. We just need everybody to use it. Saying Yes to Life, Ruth Valerio's Lent book, the thought leadership of this is really, I think, really important. That's why I was keen just to make the significance of the papal encyclical apparent earlier. But Ruth Valerio's book had a big impact. I think because COVID arrived in the midst of Lent, we didn't quite get the value out of it that we could, but Ruth wrote the book in such a way that it can be used not just in Lent, and therefore it's still there as a resource. And I've noticed a number of parishes coming back to it, and the children's version, Live Lent, was terrific fun. So that's good. And the Climate Action 100 Coalition, that's part of the wider structural change, and really important in terms of collaboration. Lambeth Conference, of course, that didn't happen. Season of Creation is happening. We're right in it at the middle. We were looking towards COP26. Chris Stark talked about the significance of that. And of course, that's not happened. Well, there we are, they've gone. But COP26 will happen next year. And the Lambeth Conference is now planned for 2022. And therefore, some of that is recoverable, is the point. And actually, one of the things that my breakout room talked about as being striking from Chris Stark's presentation was how positive he was and the progress that we're making. We are actually making enormous progress as a church with all of this. So let's note it, give thanks for it, and move on from it. I had the job of proposing the environmental motion to General Synod back in February. And you'll know that the Environmental Working Group set a deadline of 2045 because we felt that was ahead of the country as a whole, ahead of the Paris Agreement. And we thought that it could be quite a big challenge to come in much earlier than that. So we thought set the 2045 deadline and we might be able to bring it forward. But if we go too early, we'll find ourselves not being able to use the changes in technology that are happening. Synod, by not a huge majority, but a significant majority, decided that what mattered more was a sense of ambition. And it was really interesting to hear Chris Stark say that he thought it really mattered that we'd taken the 2030 date and that he thought it was doable. So we've got a date which at the moment looks a tall order. We're just in the process of defining the terms of this and what net zero means, what's in scope and what's not in scope or not yet in scope. And that'll be going back to Synod in November, so that we've got an agreed basis from which to work. The process of consultation was really interesting because the responses, and there were a lot of responses, were mostly very positive indeed, and where people were wanting to engage with us and to find ways of doing it. So Synod was challenging, but you know, people are really up for this, and the ambition is there to get to 2030. And we need to be careful about the definition, and there'll be a widening of the scope, I think, as the decade goes on. Great. Thank you. So this is the point at which I'm going to hand over, and is it Catherine taking on?
It's myself and Joe doing a double act.
Catherine and Joe doing a double act. So thank you, and I'm afraid I'm going to disappear because of other things here, but I'm really glad to have been with you, and I hope the rest of the conference goes very well.
Thank you. So Joe and I are just going to talk through some of the things that have happened since the February Synod motion and since our conferences last year. So the first of those, which Bishop Nick just mentioned, is that the definition of net zero has been written and went out for national consultation. And I think many of the people joining this conference today will be the people who have worked so hard on the responses that come back, and thank you so much for that. In the middle of everything else that you've all been dealing with, we had responses from 33 dioceses and 23 cathedrals, which I think is really, really encouraging, and largely very positive responses. So the Environmental Working Group went through that consultation response paper just this Monday. It's been quite a week. And took decisions based on the responses, and then that final definition will be able to go forward to Synod in November. A second big thing that happened since last year's conference, although it had been working on for a long time before that, is that the energy footprint tool for churches has been launched. That's a massive step forward, allowing us to work out the carbon footprint of churches. It's currently open it's staying open until the end of September. So there's just 3 weeks more that your churches can enter their utility data and work out their carbon footprint. And then it'll be closed for this year so that we can analyse the results and update the tool in time to launch it again next year for returns. It's already been used by 3,000 churches, which is really encouraging. A third thing that we'll be reporting on later today on the agenda is the analysis of our energy audit programme, which has been a really, really important piece of analysis, allowing us to learn about what action we can most cost effectively take in our churches. There's been some key bits of guidance issued, and hopefully you have all found them. And if not, I'm sure Joe can put links in the chat whilst I'm talking. So the practical path to net zero guidance, energy efficiency for our churches, and heating principles. And all of that work is really giving us a much better clarity over how to prioritise our action on those buildings which are the highest energy use buildings, and on the heating of our churches and how we can try and decarbonise that. And then another key thing that's been happening in the last few months since Synod that Joe and I have worked really, really closely on is the Net Zero Carbon webinar. And I know, looking at the names of who's here today, that quite a lot of you have come to one or more of the webinars. We've got 4 topics so far on action planning, on forming your team, on measuring and defining net zero, and on zero carbon church buildings. And we're also in the process at the moment of commissioning some further webinars on sort of specific technical subjects which are important in this area around church heating, solar PV, LED lighting, and things like that. And news on that will come in the next few weeks. You should also hopefully all have seen that the cathedral, the Church Buildings Council, sorry, it should be CBC, not CCB, too many 3-letter acronyms. The Church Buildings Council and the Cathedral Fabric Commission of England have issued a joint statement on sustainability and on how that is going to inform their work and their decision making. And the quinquennial inspection framework has been updated and now has a reinforced emphasis on environmental matters within the QI inspection. So that will take a long time to roll its way through over the next 5 years as each church comes up for their QI, but hopefully it will have a very long-lasting impact in terms of churches being given richer information about environmental steps that they can take both to mitigate and adapt their churches. Another key thing that we've been working on is engaging with Historic England, engaging with the amenity societies, and then also this weekend, David and I are attending the conference of the ecclesiastical judges to speak with those different organisations about net zero and about what that might mean in terms of their guidance and decision making. And whilst those conversations don't lead to immediate change, but I would say all of those organisations have clearly understood that the climate crisis is real and is happening, and that they need to reflect on what it means for their work, for their guidance, for their decision making. We're in just the beginning of discussions with the new Dean of Arches about the faculty rules. We're very clear, and particularly some of the DAC secretaries around the country have been really helpful in letting us know about areas where the current faculty rules aren't as helpful as they could be. And again, that's something where it takes time for change in those things to work through, but we are conscious of that and we are beginning those conversations. And then finally, from my side, before I hand over to Joe, is just that the energy audit programme for 2020-2021, the National Energy Audit Programme, has reopened and is open currently for churches around the country to register their interest in having an energy audit, and I'll touch on that again later in the afternoon.
Hello. So some of the things I'm going to talk about are the kind of ways that we've been trying to bring people along on this journey with us, the kind of ways that we can inspire people or engage them to recognise that environmental issues are something that they need to take seriously, to get involved with. So these are the kinds of things that we've been involved with. It was somewhat overshadowed, but the National Lent campaign was still hugely significant, especially as it kind of coincided with what happened at Synod and our decision to head for net zero by 2030. There was a huge take up of the little booklets that were created, and Ruth Valerio's book. I think it was the best-selling ever Lent Archbishop's Lent book. So that was really very exciting that so many people wanted to get involved and engage with that. And in fact, Ruth's book has been reissued so that it can be used at any time. So the specific links to using it as a Lent course have been taken out, and it now stands alone. So even if you didn't manage to do it because Lent was hijacked, then you can still go back to it. So that was really significant. And then other kinds of things that we are trying to hook into, so people keep coming back to this fact that the climate change is on the agenda. In particular, the season of creation that we're in at the moment. There are resources on the Season of Creation website. If you search for Season of Creation, that's what comes up. So you can use them in your churches at this time between now and the 4th of October, when we're thinking about harvest and the earth and its good gifts to us. It's a good time to renew and review our relationship with the earth. As Chris said, it's about how we treat the earth, a lot of this stuff. And part of the Season of Creation has seen the launch of Climate Sunday. The idea for that is for a church to choose a Sunday where they will have a specific service about the climate. They will make a commitment to do something about the climate change and act. And this is with a view to COP26, which is the next big international conference on climate change, where all the countries of the world come together. It will be happening in Glasgow in November next year. And Climate Sunday is about getting churches to see that they have a voice, they have a stake in this conference, that what they say will be listened to, or will be something that we can contribute to, and we can keep going with that. And then Letters of Creation is a way to engage young people in schools to express and have their voice heard. The idea of that was that the letters would be presented to the Lambeth Conference and then to COP26. But hot off the press this week, then it has been decided that the Letters for Creation scheme is going to be paused for the moment, because Lambeth Conference is not postponed to 2021 but postponed to 2022, and COP26 is not until November next year. So that's both of them are a long way ahead, and so we're going to have a pause with that and then rethink how we launch it next year to engage children in schools. It's been very difficult to engage schools at the moment when they've all been, half the children have been at home and teachers have had other things to do. So we will come back to the Letters for Creation. I think Catherine would probably be better to speak about biodiversity fields in the Church Heritage Record.
Yes, so many of you using the Church Heritage Record regularly in your work, and there's an ecology section in the Church Heritage Record, but at the moment there's very little information in that ecology section. So there's been a project going on for some time now, working with Caring for God's Acre and the National Biodiversity Network, so that data will be able to be submitted around the country by people making observations in their local churchyards, and then that will go through a quality process and then loaded into the National Biodiversity Network, and then that will feed through into our Church heritage record, so that we'll have much more useful and much richer information about ecology in the church heritage record, which will then allow better decision making to take place. And that is due to go live, I think it's either November or December this year. And when it has done, we're planning to run some sessions for DAC and DEO so that you can see those new fields and understand how to use them best.
Great, thank you. The other thing to let you know that we've been involved with, again, it's on the big picture side of the lobbying and trying to make sure our voice is heard. So the Environmental Working Group has contributed to the Parliament's own inquiry on what would a green post-COVID recovery look like. So we submitted to that inquiry, and particularly led by Mark Betson, who's our rural officer. They have been contributing to what the environmental land management scheme should look like. So there were some questions in the chat earlier today about what is this scheme, and it's still being shaped really, and we've tried to contribute, and from the perspective of faith, but also as landowners, to what that might look like. We've also touched a little bit on this. CCLA have launched a fossil fuel free fund. So a lot of churches, when they manage their investments, invest with CCLA or in the same way as CCLA, and churches have wanted to stick with that because they know it's something they can rely on and they can trust, but they've also wanted to invest in a fossil fuel free way. And so this new fund means that churches can fulfill both of those ambitions. They can invest with CCLA and be fossil free. Linked to this in a way, something else that's been going on with a pensions board. Pensions are often, so if you've got big, large investments, you'll often be very active in choosing where you're going to put your money. But pensions don't really work like that. They get invested in a passive way. So they track funds and they use a tool that will track where they should put their money. And so the pension board has been able to develop an index so that pensions can track investments that will be Paris aligned, or at the moment en route to being Paris aligned. So that means that your pension, which you're not actively buying and selling from all the time, can be ethical and be working towards net zero carbon without having to decide every day where you're going to put your money. So that's a really big thing, and that means that pensions can become fossil free as well. And then the other thing that's just happened as well this month is, I know I'm only very small when I'm on the screen like this and showing slides, but if you can see this little book here, which has just been produced by Church House Publishing. It's called A Time for Creation, and it's a liturgical resource. It's come out because it's a season of creation at the moment, but what it does is bring together all the liturgy that existed and has brought some new liturgy together, so that if you wanted to have a service of the word or a Eucharist service with a theme of environment and creation care, then all the kinds of liturgy that already exists has been brought together so that you can use that for your service. And then there's other prayers, there's responses, collects, acclamations, all with an environment and creation care theme. So when you want to draw your service together, it's all there for you. So that's really, you can get that from Church House Publishing. So that's a really nice resource. And then the other thing that we've spent a lot of time working with is working with Arusha on the Eco Church Award. And they have got this tremendous scheme, which is really, really encouraging for churches. It gives them a framework to hang what they do on. It helps them to have a holistic vision of what they're doing, so they don't get caught up in the technicalities, but they get inspired to work towards the technicalities. And it covers worship and teaching, how you look after your building, how you look after your land, how you engage with your community and global citizens, and the lifestyle of your congregation. So those 5 areas. So it gives you a really good scheme to bring your church forward on environmental issues. And there has been a really huge, you can see from this graph, a huge uptake in registrations in particular. So there's a huge demand for it at the moment. Obviously, with Q2 and the coronavirus, things have changed a little bit, but I'm sure that we're going to go back to seeing that uptake of people wanting to register as eco churches, and in particular at the moment eco dioceses. So that's starting to get the picture that as we need to do this collectively, we need to work together. So when a diocese opts to be an eco diocese, one of the things it has to do is have so many eco churches. So you'll see that knock-on effect as more and more dioceses recognize that this is something they need to do, then they will have to bring more and more churches on that journey with them. So this is all really encouraging to see how we're stepping forward and embracing this as a thing that we in churches need to get involved with and take seriously.
So then looking ahead, some of the things which are sort of national priorities for work in the coming year. These are some of the ones at the top of the list, and they're a mixture of things which are in Joe's area of work around mission and public affairs, and mine over in cathedral and church buildings. I think the first couple are yours, aren't they, Joe?
Yeah. So we're recognising that this link between theology and how we care for creation and how that links to missions is really important to be able to articulate that. And there's quite a lot of stuff out there. So that liturgical book that I've just showed you starts to bring that together. And lots of people have done quite a lot of thinking about this, but we need to find a way to bring it all together so it's easily accessible. So when you've got that question coming your way, whoa, why has this got anything to do with church? Then there's somewhere where you can go for that. And there's people on the EWG, that's the Environment Working Group, who are perfectly placed to do that. And so we're moving forward with that. We've talked about COP26, which is the climate change conference next year. And we're working to make sure that we are part of the faith voice at the International Climate Conference, joining in with others, making sure that the perspective of faith communities is heard, to recognise that we need to take significant action on this. And I think one of the beauties of the faith voice is that we have that international perspective. So although it's happening in the UK, we want to recognise that the global justice angle of this is really key, and we can bring that voice to the COP.
So the next few are more my way. There's a really important piece of work that needs to be done around developing measures of net zero. That we've got the EFT now for our churches, but we need similar tools for other buildings. So nationally, Research and Stats have applied for resource to enable them to build that toolkit, and we'll hear this month whether they've got it or not. Our fingers are very firmly crossed that they will have that resource, which means they can then set off on developing our methods for measuring net zero on our other types of building. And then another piece of work that I think is going to be really significant for the Cathedral and Church Buildings Division, and particularly for myself over the next probably 2 years, is around looking for approaches to measuring the whole life carbon of our building projects. We know there are a number of methodologies out there at the moment. We haven't found one yet that we think we can kind of lift and apply, but we want to actively try and see if we can find an approach that we can use for our church building projects, and then find some test churches to use that on, and start seeing how we can build that information into our decision making about building projects. An ongoing, such an important dot point, it's easy to write, it's very hard to do, is around identifying sources of funding. We are regularly asked, we are very conscious about the need for funding for environmental projects. There are no simple answers to that. We have the online guide that has a whole list of different grant funders. And then also I just try and stay aware, and Joe tries to stay aware of any other new sources of funding that are out there, and let particularly the DEO network know about that. There's a number of pieces of guidance that are being worked on at the moment. The most important really is our heating guidance, but I am also updating guidance on renewables. And Joe is working on offsetting, and generally we're trying to, as quickly as we can, bring guidance along behind all those key areas on reducing the carbon emissions from our building that we can. If you have a really good piece of guidance already in your diocese that you think we could share around the country, I would absolutely love to know about it, so please do send it my way. As I said, the energy audit programme is reopened now, and so that'll be a real priority for the coming months. It runs from the autumn through to the spring, and learning as much as we can from those audits. And then again, a longer term piece of work, and one that Mark Betson is very involved with as the Officer for Farming and Rural Affairs, is around understanding better how we can manage our land for climate and nature. there's been set up a DEO group on land and biodiversity that again is trying to understand and inform those questions. You probably know at the moment the government has consultation open on the proposed planning reforms, so we'll be feeding into that. Bethan, who leads on the parliamentary side on environment work, is particularly looking at how we engage around the Environment Bill. And then the last two are sort of me and Jo jointly are just engagement with as many audiences as we can in as many ways as we can, and trying to support eco-church and eco-diocese around the country. So is there anything you wanted to add to that list that I didn't say as I went?
No, I think that's everything. There's a little question in the chat about the, so I'll answer it now rather than type, about getting congregations to get involved in lobbying as well. And the answer is, yeah, always. We can encourage our congregations to speak to their MPs. The Environment Bill at the moment is coming towards the end, and it's in the Lords at the moment, so MPs are not really the place to engage with that at the moment, but we are the Lords Spiritual, so that's some of the bishops who sit in the Lords are going to take a really good look at that. I'm not sure where the planning reform bill is up to, so whether getting in touch with your MP is something that's possible at the moment.
So now, I've simultaneously got my eye on the clock and the questions, because we had said we were going to break out groups at this point. Right. Let's take the sort of two questions that are at the top of the pile. So there's a question from Richard. One of the things that struck me most on visiting local churches is the limited information on energy usage. That is certainly true. Is there a potential to move to tariffs that promote installation of SMETs to smart meters that will provide, this is a very specific question, smart meters that will provide us with much higher resolution data on energy consumption? I absolutely agree with the thrust of that question. One of the best ways of getting people to reduce their energy consumption is to get them to understand what they're already using, and smart metering is brilliant for that. There isn't, as far as I know, any sort of national push towards moving on to smart metering, but I would absolutely recommend churches and clergy families and schools to have smart metering, because when you understand what you're using, you're much more likely to manage it. And the other question at the top, which is sort of maybe your way, Jo, who within national structures will work to ensure that government takes seriously the need for society to share the costs in relation to church buildings via significant new funding schemes? How can this be done most effectively?
Oh, that's a very good question. So we are asking questions at the moment. We're trying to use the parliamentary route at the moment to ask questions about whether the money that the chancellors are making available is available to churches. There is always a question mark that the work that would be done under that scheme would be to the required standard, especially with the very specific requirements that our heritage buildings have. But we are asking those questions via the Lords. And I think it'd be really interesting from when the report comes out from the Committee on Climate Change in December, which is going to start addressing some of these questions, for us to take it from there and you know, use that as a way of talking to government. So we do have those. That route through the Lord's Spiritual is a really interesting and useful one, and we're using that as much as we can. But I'm always open to other suggestions.
And then 3, which can be answered very quickly. So there's a question about having a fixed Climate Sunday. Jo, I think that was originally the plan, but then COP moved, and therefore we've moved to having it be a sort of a longer burn, haven't we?
Yes, that's it. There will be, though, a national one. The date's not been fixed yet, but there will be one that will sort of bring it all together, probably in Glasgow, because that's where the COP will be, probably broadcast. Now that we all know how to put our services on Facebook and YouTube, we'll do that as well. So there'll be something that we can come together nationally, either in person or virtually.
Jo and I talked through some of the progress over the last year. And it's so important to say that that progress is not in any way down to 2 people. It's due to a huge network of people all around the country and here in Church House. And so I just would say having skipped over the thank you slide before we went out into breakout groups, to say thank you to everybody, the amazing DEO network, and people who I would call a DEO. I know you have different role titles all around the country, and DAC colleagues who've been working so hard on trying to integrate environmental concerns with everything else that you're dealing with, and everyone else, members of environmental working groups, all sorts of different roles around the country. It's been very much a joint effort, particularly since February, thinking how to respond to the amazingly ambitious Synod motion. So thank you